The third plate was already on the table when they walked in. I had set it at the head, the chair that had never belonged to anyone. The seat Derek always said was, "For guests we actually want to keep." White porcelain, the good set. The one we bought together at a small shop in Savannah the year we got married, the one I only brought out when something deserved to be marked. Derek saw it and stopped walking. Sienna didn't. She kept moving her eyes, going to the painting above the fireplace, the way they did when something is already familiar. That told me everything I needed to confirm. I had known about them for 11 weeks. I had said nothing, asked nothing, moved nothing out of place. What I had done instead was make one phone call, send one text message, and cook a 4-course meal for a dinner party of 4. Some women confront. Some women cry in parking lots or scroll through phones at 2 in the morning, looking for proof they already have in their chest. I set a third plate. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's at this table with me tonight. The house on Cascade Road was mine before it was ours. I bought it at 31. 7 months after I made partner at Ellison and Cross Architectural Group, 3 weeks before Derek proposed on the rooftop of a restaurant in Midtown. He had rented out entirely 40 tables, all empty, one small one in the center with a candle that kept going out in the wind. He got down on one knee anyway. I said yes anyway. That was the kind of people we were then. We worked around the inconvenient parts. The house needed everything when I bought it. The kitchen had avocado green tile from 1974. The master bathroom had a drop ceiling that someone had installed inexplicably over original crown molding. I spent 14 months renovating it myself. Not with my hands. I'm an architect, not a contractor, but with my eye, my decisions, my weekends, standing in the middle of rooms, imagining what they could hold. I picked the wide plank white oak floors. I sourced the unlacquered brass fixtures before they became the thing everyone wanted. I designed the built-in bookshelves in the study that went floor to ceiling on 3 walls and made every person who walked in stop and put a hand on the wood like they needed to confirm it was real. Derek moved in 8 months after we married. He brought his clothes, his record collection, a leather sectional I let him keep in the basement, and a confidence that the life I had built was now something we had built together. I did not correct this. Love sometimes asks you to let someone share credit for things they arrived at late. We were good for a long time. I want to be clear about that. Not good in the way people perform goodness for other people, the matching outfits at church, the coordinated captions, the anniversary posts that are really just proof of concept. We were good in the quiet ways. He made coffee before I woke up and left the mug on my side of the bathroom counter. I kept his dry cleaning schedule in my phone because he always forgot the Tuesday pickup. We argued about money twice, about his mother 7 times, about nothing that ever felt like a beginning of something worse. On Friday nights, I cooked. It started the first year of our marriage as a practical arrangement. We were both working long hours. Weekends were for recovery. Friday was the one night we protected. But it became something else over time. A ritual, an agreement without words. Whatever the week had done to us Friday at 7, we sat at that table together and we ate food I had made, and we talked about everything except work for at least the first hour. 9 years. We missed maybe 11 Fridays total. Twice for travel, once when I had the flu, once when his father passed, and we sat in a hospital waiting room, instead eating vending machine sandwiches that neither of us touched. That table had held a lot of things. I thought about that the Wednesday evening I first noticed the shift. Derek had started staying later on Wednesdays, not unusual for a litigator in the middle of trial season, and he had explained it that way without me asking. But that Wednesday, I was in the kitchen when he came home at 10:48 p.m., and I watched him set his jacket down on the back of the chair the way he always did, and something in the motion was different. Too casual. The careful casualness of someone who has been practicing looking normal. I did not say anything. I noticed the smell later when I moved his jacket to hang it properly. Not perfume exactly, more like the memory of a space that had been warm and close and belonged to someone else. A hotel lobby, a car with the windows up, the specific atmosphere of a private thing. I still did not say anything. 3 weeks later, I saw the name. I was not going through his phone. I want to be precise about this because it matters to me even now. His phone was on the kitchen counter, and it lit up the way phones do, and I was standing close enough to see the preview without moving toward it. 11:47 p.m. The name was Sienna. The message began with a lowercase letter, which meant it was mid-conversation, which meant there had been a conversation, which meant this was not new. I turned back to the dish I was drying. I dried it completely. I put it away. I turned off the kitchen light and walked upstairs, and I lay in the dark next to my husband, and I felt something I had not expected. Not rage, not grief, not the particular devastation of betrayal. What I felt was a strange and total clarity, the kind that only comes when something you have suspected for long enough finally has a name. I knew what I was going to do. I did not know yet exactly how, but I had time, and I had always been better at design than Derek knew. A woman who can look at a gutted house and see what it will become has a particular skill. She is comfortable with the space between what is and what will be. She knows that the most important decisions happen quietly in the planning stage before anyone else can see what she's building. I started planning on a Thursday. By the following Friday, I had everything I needed. The first thing I noticed was the Wednesday pattern. The second thing was the dry cleaning. Derek had always been particular about his shirts. Thomas pink, mostly a few canali pieces he'd had since law school that still fit because he was disciplined about the gym in the way that men who fear aging often are. He dropped them at Prestige Cleaners on Tuesdays, picked them up Thursdays. 9 years, never varied. I had the pickup reminder in my phone under DT to Cleaners, and he had never once thanked me for it because he had never once realized he needed to. In October, he started picking them up himself. A small thing. The kind of thing that means nothing unless you are already watching. I did not say anything about it. I simply stopped setting the reminder. The third thing was a Tuesday evening in early November. I was in the study working late on a mixed-use development proposal for a site in West Midtown. 12 floors, ground-level retail, the kind of project that requires the specific concentration that only happens after 9 p.m. when the house is quiet. Derek came to the doorway and told me he was going to bed. Normal, routine. But he was wearing the gray Henley I had bought him for his birthday in August, soft cashmere, the kind you wash separately and lay flat to dry, and it had a small pull near the left shoulder. A snag. The kind that happens when fabric catches on something specific, a zipper, a clasp. A piece of jewelry worn at a particular height by a particular person. I looked at the pull for 2 seconds. He said goodnight. I said goodnight. After I heard him on the stairs, I sat very still for a moment, and then I turned back to my drawings. The West Midtown project had a structural issue on the 7th floor I'd been working around for days. I solved it that night. Clarity, I have found, tends to arrive in groups. The fourth thing was a Saturday morning the second week of November. Derek had gone to play tennis with his friend Calvin at Bitsy Grant, a real thing. A standing Saturday thing. I had never had reason to question it. He left at 8. He came back at 12:40. Tennis with Calvin is 90 minutes of court time plus breakfast at the diner on North Side that they had been going to since 2019. Calvin always gets the Eggs Benedict. Derek always gets the short stack. They are always back before noon. I did not call Calvin. I did not need to. When Derek came in, his hair was damp in a way that tennis sweat does not make hair damp. Tennis sweat dries unevenly at the temples and the back of the neck. What I was looking at was the uniform dampness of a man who had showered somewhere else. He kissed my cheek in the kitchen. I was making tea. I handed him a glass of water and asked about the match. And he told me Calvin had finally fixed his backhand. And I said that was great, and we stood in the kitchen together for 3 minutes talking about nothing. And I felt the specific chill of knowing exactly where you are, while the person beside you believes you are somewhere else. Entirely. That afternoon, I called Marcus Webb. Marcus and I had worked together on a pro bono project 2 years earlier, a community center redesign in Vine City, one of those jobs that pays nothing and costs everything, and is somehow the one you remember most clearly. Marcus did security consulting on the side. Background checks, asset searches, the occasional thing he described only as information management. I had referred 2 clients to him. He owed me nothing technically, but he had once told me that if I ever needed to know something I could not find myself, I should call before I did anything else. I called. I told him I needed a name. A woman named Sienna. I had a first name, only a face I remembered from a charity gala at the Woodruff Arts Center 8 months earlier, and a phone number Derek had saved under a contact name. I will not repeat because it was the kind of detail that is almost funny when the shock has worn off enough. Marcus called me back in 40 minutes. Sienna Elaine Cole, Nee, Washington. 31 years old. Event planner, owner of a boutique firm called Gather and Grace that did corporate events and private parties for Atlanta's professional circuit. Married to Raymond Cole, 44, owner of 3 restaurants in the Buckhead and Old Fourth Ward areas. Cole's on Peachtree, the newer one on Ponce, and a private dining club downtown that required a membership and a referral to get through the door. I knew Raymond Cole's name. Not well, but enough. Atlanta's professional black community is large enough to feel like a city and small enough to function like a neighborhood. You know the names before you know the faces. Raymond Cole was a name that moved through certain rooms with the particular weight of someone who had built something real. Sienna had been at the Woodruff Gala with him. I remembered her now, more clearly. She had been standing slightly apart from him, the way spouses do at events, where they have been to too many of the same parties present, but not adjacent. She had been wearing a ring, a significant one, the kind you notice and then forget because it belongs to someone else's life. It had not occurred to me then that our lives would eventually sit down at the same table. I thanked Marcus. He asked if I needed anything else. I told him I would let him know. I put my phone face down on the desk and sat with what I had for a long time. Not processing grief, I had been doing that for weeks already in the small hours before dawn. What I was doing now was something closer to architecture, looking at the structure of what existed, identifying the load-bearing elements, beginning to understand what could be moved and what would have to come down entirely. Raymond Cole did not know about Derek. Derek did not know that I knew about Sienna. Sienna did not know what I was capable of when I had enough time and a clear set of plans. Nobody ever does with quiet women. That is the precise advantage of being underestimated in your own home. Outside, the November light was going flat and gray, the way Atlanta light does in the late afternoon when the season is turning. I got up and turned on the lamp in the corner of the study. The warm light fell across the drawings on my desk. 12 floors load-bearing core, a problem I'd already solved. I sat back down and began to plan something else entirely. The call came on a Thursday afternoon at 4:17 p.m. I know the exact time, because I was in a client meeting, the West Midtown project final presentation. The room smelled like cold brew and new carpet, and the particular anxiety of people about to approve something expensive. My phone was face down on the table the way I always kept it in meetings, and I felt it vibrate once, twice, then go still. Derek. I let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, when the clients had shaken hands and filed out, and my associate Priya was rolling up the presentation boards, I listened to the message. His voice was the version he used when he wanted something, not the asking voice, the announcing voice. The one that presented decisions as conversations. Hey. So, I'm going to bring someone from the office by for dinner tomorrow. Colleague I've been working with on the Hargrove case. Hope that's okay. You always make enough anyway. 9 years of Friday dinners reduced to a logistical convenience. A reason why bringing his girlfriend into our home on our night was not an imposition, but a compliment. I stood in the empty conference room for a moment after the message ended. Priya asked if everything was okay. I told her yes, just a scheduling thing. And I helped her finish rolling the boards. And I carried one end of the presentation tube to the elevator, and I talked about the client feedback in the lobby, and I held the specific expression of a woman whose afternoon was proceeding normally until I was in my car alone in the parking deck on Peachtree Street with the engine off. I sat there for 4 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. What I felt was not what I'd expected. I had been waiting for something to happen, had known something would happen. And yet the specific shape of it, the audacity of it, the almost architectural boldness of a man who would bring the woman he was sleeping with into the home his wife designed on the night his wife had cooked for him for 9 years without missing, was something I had not fully constructed in my imagination. He had chosen tomorrow, a Friday. I started the car. On the drive home, I thought about the first Friday dinner I had made after we married. Chicken thighs braised with olives and preserved lemon, a recipe from a cookbook with a broken spine I had owned since culinary school. Not my school and ex-boyfriend's. I had kept it when we separated because it was better than anything I owned. Derek had eaten 2 full servings and asked if I had made the recipe up myself. And I had said yes, because in the moment it felt more romantic. And also because I was the one who had stood at the stove for an hour. And that counted for something. He had believed me for 6 years until I made it again at a dinner party. And a guest recognized it and named the cookbook. And Derek had laughed the kind of laugh that means he was recalibrating something. Small lies accrete. On both sides. That is something I understood by the time I pulled into the driveway on Cascade Road. I called Marcus from the driveway before I went inside. I need you to do one more thing, I said. What kind of thing? The kind where you find out if Raymond Cole has plans tomorrow evening. A pause. And if he does? Then I need his number. Another pause longer. Anna. Marcus. What are you planning? Dinner, I said. For 4. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, give me an hour. I went inside, and I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen with the unlacquered brass fixtures and the white oak floors, and the window above the sink that looked out onto the backyard where I had planted a fig tree the 2nd year we lived here, because I had read somewhere that fig trees take years to produce fruit. And I had liked the idea of planting something that required patience. The tree was 12 feet tall now. It had produced figs every August for the past 5 years. Derek had eaten them without ever remarking on how long I'd waited for them. I opened the refrigerator. I had groceries for 2, as always. I took a quiet inventory, and then I wrote a list on the notepad I kept on the counter, the small yellow one, with the magnetic back that had been on the refrigerator so long it had left a shadow on the stainless steel. I added things. I thought about what 4 people would need. I thought about presentation. If you are going to set a stage, the details matter. Anyone who has ever designed a room knows this. The thing people feel when they walk in is never about one element. It is about the accumulation. The way the light hits the table. The weight of the flatware. The smell of something that has been cooking long enough to mean it. At 6:23 p.m., Marcus sent me a text. A name, a number. 3 words beneath it he doesn't know. I read it twice. I saved the number under Raymond Cole. His full name spelled correctly. Nothing cute, nothing coded. I was done with coded things. I did not text him yet. I set my phone down on the counter and I began to cook. Braised short ribs, 8 hours minimum, which meant starting now for a 7 o'clock dinner tomorrow. A wild mushroom risotto that would need attention but rewarded it. A bitter green salad with the champagne vinaigrette I made from memory. A chocolate tart that I had been making since before I met Derek and would be making long after. I stood at the stove and I cooked. And outside the kitchen window, the fig tree was dark against the November sky, bare now. All the fruit long gone, the branches holding nothing but their own particular patience. My phone lit up once at 9:15. Derek, a text this time. Don't wait up. Working late. See you tomorrow. I read it. I put the short ribs in the oven. I set the temperature to 275. Low and slow. The kind of heat that breaks down even the most resistant things given enough time. I went to bed at 11. I slept without difficulty. Some people, when they have made a decision they believe in, find that sleep comes easy. I have always been one of those people. It is a quality I used to think was confidence. I understand now that it is something older and quieter than that. It is the particular rest of a woman who knows exactly what tomorrow will look like before tomorrow has begun. The short ribs cooked all night. By morning, the whole house smelled like something inevitable. I woke at 6:14 without an alarm. The house smelled like the short ribs, deep and dark. And something close to caramel, where the braising liquid had reduced overnight against the edges of the Dutch oven. I lay still for 90 seconds, the way I always do in the morning, running the day's architecture in my mind before I move through it. What needs to happen? In what order? Where the structural weight sits. Today was simple. Today had 4 moving parts, and I had already built the load-bearing frame. What remained was finish work. I got up and went downstairs in my robe and checked the oven. The short ribs had done what short ribs do when you give them enough time and low enough heat. They had surrendered completely. The meat had pulled back from the bone, and the braising liquid had gone dark and glossy. And the whole Dutch oven held the specific gravity of something that had been thoroughly, patiently transformed. I turned the oven off and left the lid on and let them rest. I made coffee. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the backyard in the early light. The fig tree. The garden beds I had put in along the south fence 3 summers ago, dormant now. Just dark soil and the cut-back stalks of things that would return in April. I had always found November gardens more interesting than spring ones. There is more honesty in the dormant version of a thing. Derek came downstairs at 7:50. He was already dressed for the office, the charcoal canali suit, the white shirt, the small silver cufflinks his father had left him. He looked good. Derek had always looked good. I had married a man who understood the power of presentation, which was something we had in common, and which had for a long time felt like a foundation. "Smells incredible in here," he said. "Short ribs," I said. "I started them last night." He poured himself coffee. "You didn't have to go all out." "I know," I said. He kissed my cheek on his way to the door. His mouth was warm, and he smelled like the cedar soap he had used for as long as I had known him. And I stood very still while it happened. And then he was gone, and the door closed, and I heard his car back out of the driveway, and I stood in the kitchen alone, with the smell of the short ribs and the morning light coming through the window above the sink, and I felt nothing that needed immediate attention. Only the clean forward motion of a plan in progress. At 9 a.m., I texted Raymond Cole. I had written the message the night before in the Notes app on my phone. Not because I could not compose it in the moment, but because I wanted to read it 10 times before I sent it. Wanted to be certain of every word, every punctuation mark, everything it said and did not say. "Mr. Cole, my name is Anna. We haven't met properly, but I believe we have mutual interests. Your wife Sienna is having dinner at my home tonight at 7 p.m., 1847 Cascade Road, SW, Atlanta. I think you should join us. I'll explain everything when you arrive. Please come alone. I read it one final time. I sent it. I put the phone face down on the counter, and I went upstairs, and I showered, and I got dressed. Black, wide-leg trousers, a cream silk blouse, the small gold earrings I wore when I wanted to feel precise. I did my hair the low, twisted bun smooth and controlled every coil in its place. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, not performing anything, just confirming. My phone was face down on the bathroom counter when I came back to it. One message, Raymond Cole. Who is this really? I had anticipated this. The text of a man who does not want the thing he is reading to be true and is hoping for an error, a wrong number, a misunderstanding he can walk back from into the version of his life he understood this morning. I typed, I'm the wife. Your wife has been seeing my husband. Tonight is an opportunity for both of us to have a conversation that is long overdue. I hope you'll come. 3 minutes passed. I set the phone down and went to the kitchen and began making the risotto stock, onion, celery, a Parmesan rind, cold water, the slow business of building a base. The phone buzzed on the counter. What time did you say? 7, I wrote. Dinner will be ready. He did not respond again. He did not need to. The message had done what messages do. When they find the right person at the right moment, it had landed in the place where the truth had already been living unacknowledged and given it a door. By noon, I had the stock simmering and the tart shell blind-baked and resting on a rack. I set the table at 12:30. The dining room table seats 8. I had designed the room around it, the proportions of the space, the height of the pendant lights above it, the way the built-in sideboard along the east wall held the line of the room together. I had always loved this room, most of any room in the house. It was the room that had held the most of us, the dinner parties, the holidays, the quiet Friday nights, the arguments that started at the table and ended somewhere else, the reconciliations that ended here. 4 place settings: the good porcelain white with a thin platinum rim, the Savannah set, the good flatware. Linen napkins I ironed myself, not because they needed it, but because the motion of ironing is meditative in a way I've always needed on days that require stillness. I set 3 settings at the sides of the table. I set the 4th at the head. I stood back and looked at it. The head of the table. The chair that had never officially belonged to anyone. The seat Derek always called, for guests we actually want to keep. I had chosen that phrase once as a joke about my mother-in-law, and it had made Derek laugh so hard he had to set his fork down. I did not smile at the memory. I simply noted it and let it pass through the way you learn to let things pass through when holding them would compromise your structural integrity. At 2 in the afternoon, Priya called about a minor revision on the West Midtown drawings. I talked her through it for 22 minutes, made 2 decisions, delegated a 3rd, and got off the phone. At 3, I began the risotto, the first edition of stock, the first patient stir. At 4:30, I made the vinaigrette. At 5, I assembled the chocolate tart. At 5:45, I changed into the dress I had selected the night before, deep navy structured shoulders, the kind of dress that reads, as composed in any light. At 6:15, Derek texted, on our way, 20 miles, our way. I read it and set the phone down and went to the dining room, and I looked at the table one more time. 4 settings. The good porcelain, the linen napkins pressed flat, the candles unlit. I would light them when I heard the car. Everything exactly where it needed to be. In architecture, there is a moment after years of planning and months of construction when you walk into a finished space for the first time. The drawings become walls. The elevations become rooms. What existed only in your mind and on paper becomes something you can stand inside of. That moment, the moment before anyone else has entered, when the space is entirely yours and entirely true, is the closest thing to pure satisfaction I have ever known. I stood in my dining room on a Friday evening in November in Atlanta, and I felt that exact thing. The car would be here in 20 minutes. I went to light the candles. They arrived at 6:53. I heard the car before I saw the headlights. Derek's Audi, the particular sound of the engine dropping as he pulled into the driveway, the specific silence that follows when he cuts the ignition. I was in the kitchen adjusting the risotto. I turned the heat to low, set the wooden spoon across the rim of the pot, and walked to the front hallway. I did not hurry. I had the particular calm of someone who has already seen the room before anyone else arrived. The door opened. Derek came in first. He was still in the charcoal suit from this morning jacket, now slightly relaxed, the top button of his shirt open the way it gets after a long day. His energy was a specific kind of elevated the brightness of a man who has been performing a version of himself all day and is relieved to be somewhere he believes is safe. He smiled when he saw me, and the smile was real, which was the part I had not fully prepared for. Derek's smile had always been real even when everything around it was not. "Hey," he said. "This smells unbelievable." "Short ribs," I said. "They've been going since last night." Sienna stepped in behind him. She was dressed well. A burnt sienna-wrapped dress, ironic in a way she could not have known. Gold drop earrings, the loose waves she wore in the photograph Marcus had sent me alongside her name and her husband's. She was carrying a bottle of wine Prisoner Cabernet, which told me she had thought about what to bring and had chosen something expensive enough to impress, but not expensive enough to be remarkable. A woman calculating a performance. She held the bottle toward me with both hands and said, "Anna, this place is stunning. Thank you so much for having me." She said my name as though she knew me. She said it with the ease of someone who had heard it enough times in enough private conversations that it had lost its foreignness. "Thank you for coming," I said. I took the wine. I looked at her directly. Her eyes were warm and practiced and gave away nothing except the faintest trace of assessment, the quick inventory a woman performs when she enters the home of a woman whose life she has been moving through at an angle. I stepped back and gestured toward the dining room. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." Derek put his hand on the small of Sienna's back as they moved through the foyer. He did it without thinking. The unconscious navigation of a man in the company of someone his body has already mapped. His hand knew where to go before he did. I watched it happen from 2 steps behind them, and I noted it the way I note a structural calculation that confirms what I already knew, not with surprise, not with pain, but with the clean registration of a fact that now had physical evidence. We moved into the dining room. Sienna stopped when she saw it. Not the table, not yet. She stopped at the painting above the fireplace. The same one she had noticed in the foyer during whatever previous visit had made this house familiar to her, the one I had been turning over in my mind since Marcus first confirmed what I suspected. It was a large format abstract by a painter named Jerome Dodson, mostly blues and ochres, with a vertical line of deep red through the center that Derek had once said looked like a fault line. I had bought it at an auction at the High Museum the year before we were married, had carried the memory of it in my mind for 3 weeks. Before I bid on it, had hung it in the dining room because I wanted to eat in front of something that felt alive. Sienna said, "I've been thinking about this painting since." And then she stopped. A clean stop. The kind where the sentence knows before the speaker does that it has gone somewhere it cannot come back from. She looked at Derek. A fraction of a second. The communication of people who have developed shorthand. Derek said smoothly, covering, "I was telling Sienna about your art collection. She's interested in that space. Are you?" I said. Not a question. the cadence of a statement that is doing the work of a question without the vulnerability of one. "I try to be," Sienna said. Her recovery was good. I gave her credit for it. I went to the sideboard and opened the prisoner Cabernet she had brought and poured 3 glasses and brought them to the table. Derek pulled out a chair and sat. Sienna took the seat across from him. I went to the kitchen and came back with the risotto, set it in the center of the table, went back for the salad, then the short ribs in the braising pot still warm from the oven. I set each dish down carefully. Then I sat, not in my usual seat, at the head of the table, in the chair that had never officially belonged to anyone, Derek noticed. A small thing moved across his face, not quite confusion, more like recalibration, the micro-expression of a man absorbing a data point that doesn't fit the model he arrived with. He said nothing. He reached for the risotto. "This is extraordinary," Sienna said after the first bite. She was not performing the compliment. The risotto genuinely was extraordinary, because I had been making it for 15 years, and I had never made it badly. And tonight, I had made it with the specific attention of someone cooking the last meal they will ever make in a particular chapter of their life. "Thank you," I said. Derek served himself the short ribs. He talked the Hargrove case, a ruling that had gone their way that afternoon, a partner at the firm who had said something mildly funny at lunch. He was performing normalcy, which required him to perform it loudly enough to fill the space where normalcy had been. I ate and I listened, and I asked appropriate questions, and Sienna contributed at the right moments in the way of someone who had heard some version of these stories before. Midway through the main course, Derek refilled his wine. He refilled Sienna's. He held the bottle toward me. "I'm fine," I said. He set it down. "So, how long have you two been working together?" I asked. I looked at Derek when I asked it, but I let my eyes move to Sienna before he answered. "About 8 months," Derek said. 8 months. The number arrived and sat on the table between all 3 of us, though only 2 of us understood its full weight. 8 months. November back to March. March when I'd been in Houston for 3 weeks on a project, and Derek had called every evening, and I had fallen asleep on the phone twice and woken up to a deadline. "That's a meaningful amount of time," I said. "It really is," Sienna said. She said it with the warmth of someone who means something true and is hoping it will be received as something else. I smiled. Derek looked at me for a half-second too long. The animal instinct of a man who has lived with a woman long enough to know the difference between her smiles. He knew this one. He had just never seen it aimed at this particular target before. I put down my fork. I placed my napkin on the table beside my plate. I stood. "I forgot something in the kitchen," I said. "One moment." I walked out of the dining room and down the hall and into the kitchen, and I stood at the counter and I picked up my phone. The clock read 7:42 p.m. I had texted Raymond Cole the address at 6 that morning with a single follow-up, dinner at 7. Come at 7:45. Use the front door. It was 7:42. I picked up the good porcelain. The 4th plate. White with a thin platinum rim, the Savannah set the one Derek and I had bought together in the first year of a life. I had spent 9 years building and 11 weeks dismantling, with the patience of someone who understands that the most important demolitions are the ones that look until the very last moment, like everything is still standing. I carried the plate to the dining room. I set it at the head of the table, where I'd been sitting. I moved to the side my original seat, the one I had held for 9 years of Friday dinners. I sat down. I picked up my fork. Derek stared at the 4th setting, the empty chair, the plate positioned with the same precision as the other 3 napkin-folded flatware aligned the water glass filled. "Anna," he said. His voice had changed. The dinner party voice was gone. What was underneath it was something older and less practiced. Who else is coming? I looked at him across the table. Raymond, I said. He's parking. The room held the silence for exactly 4 seconds. Then the doorbell rang. I did not rush to the door. I set my fork down. I folded my hands in my lap for a moment, the way I do at the end of a long meeting when the decision has been made, and what remains is only the formality of saying it aloud. Then I stood, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked to the front door at the pace of a woman who lives in this house and always has. I opened the door. Raymond Cole was taller than I had expected. The photographs Marcus had sent were professional headshots, the kind taken for restaurant group websites. Controlled light-controlled angle, the version of a person they have decided to present to strangers. The man standing on my porch on a Friday evening in November was the uncontrolled version. He was wearing a dark wool overcoat over a charcoal shirt, no-tie dress shoes that had walked through the damp of the evening. His face was set in the expression of a man who has driven across Atlanta towards something he does not fully understand and has decided somewhere on the way to trust the instinct that told him to come anyway. He was 44 years old, and he looked it in the way that men who have built things with their hands and their money and their name tend to look at not aged, just weighted. The specific gravity of someone who has been responsible for things. He looked at me. "Anna," he said. Not a question. "Raymond," I said. "Thank you for coming. Please come in." He stepped inside. He looked at the hallway, the white oak floors, the painting at the far end of the corridor, the warm light from the dining room reaching toward us like something being offered. He was reading the house the way people read spaces when they are trying to understand the person inside them. I recognize the impulse. I do it myself. "They're in the dining room," I said. He nodded once. He did not ask who they were. He already knew. He had driven 40 minutes across Atlanta on a Friday night on the word of a woman he had never met because some part of him had known before I texted that there was a they, and that they were somewhere on Friday nights when they were supposed to be somewhere else. I led him down the hall. We reached the dining room doorway. I stepped aside and let him enter first. The sequence of the next 11 seconds was something I had not choreographed. I had planned, the evening had set, the conditions had opened the doors in the right order. But what happened in those 11 seconds was its own architecture built entirely from the materials of what these 4 people had accumulated between them over 8 months, of a thing that had required everyone in this room to know something and say nothing. Raymond walked in. Derek looked up from his wine glass. The recognition was not immediate. It took 2 full seconds, the lag of a mind encountering a face in a context so far outside expectation that the processing slows. Then it arrived. I watched it move across Derek's face in layers, the recognition, the confusion, the rapid and terrible calculation, the moment when the calculation completed, and he understood what the 4th plate meant and who had set it there and why. His hand tightened on the stem of the wine glass. Sienna had her back to the door. She had turned slightly in her chair toward where I had been sitting, perhaps beginning to wonder about the length of my absence from the table. She heard footsteps and began to turn. She turned. She saw her husband standing in the doorway of a dining room he had no reason to be in a house she had given him no reason to know existed, wearing his dark wool overcoat still damp from the November evening, looking at her with the face of a man who has just seen the specific shape of a thing he had been refusing to see for long enough that refusing had become its own exhausting full-time work. For a moment, no one spoke. The candles on the table burned at the particular steady height they reach when there is no movement in the room to disturb them. Then Raymond pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the chair I had set the 4th plate at, the chair that had never belonged to anyone, and he sat down. He did not look at Derek. He did not look at me where I stood in the doorway. He looked at Sienna, and his gaze had the quality of something that has been waiting a long time to be allowed to be exactly what it is. He said, "Sienna." One word. her name. Spoke in the way you speak the name of someone you have known long enough to say it like a complete sentence. She said, "Raymond." "Don't," he said, quietly. The single word of a man who is too tired for the opening moves of a conversation he already knows the shape of. Derek set his wineglass down. The small sound of crystal on linen in a very quiet room. He looked at me. I had returned to my seat, my original seat, the side of the table I had occupied for 9 years of Friday dinners. I was sitting with my hands folded in front of me, and I was looking back at him with the expression I had been practicing without knowing I was practicing it for 11 weeks. The expression of a woman who has already moved through every version of this moment in her mind, and has arrived here at the actual moment, with nothing left to feel that she has not already felt in private. He said quietly, "Anna, how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said, to make sure Raymond had time to find parking. Silence. Raymond looked at me for the first time since sitting down. Something moved across his face. Not quite gratitude, not yet something rawer than that. The look of a man who has just been handed information he needed and is not sure whether to thank the person who handed it or simply absorb it without ceremony, because ceremony is not what the moment requires. I picked up my fork. "The risotto is better warm," I said. "Raymond, can I serve you some?" He looked at the food on the table. The short ribs, the risotto, the salad, the careful placement of things I'd been building since the night before. He looked at it the way people look at evidence of effort, when effort is the last thing they expected to encounter. "Please," he said. I served him. Derek had not moved. Sienna had not moved. The two of them sat across from each other at the sides of the table, the positions I had set for them, the positions they had arrived in. And the irony of the seating arrangement was not lost on me. And I believe it was not lost on any of the 4 people in that room. The 2 people who had built a secret were now sitting exactly opposite each other in the home of the woman whose life they had been moving through at the table she had set, eating the food she had cooked, while their respective spouses occupied the positions of authority at either end. Raymond ate the risotto. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "This is very good." "Thank you," I said. "You cooked all of this tonight?" "Started the short ribs last night," I said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the short ribs in their braising pot, still glossy, still dark, still holding the patience of something that had been transformed over many hours of low and careful heat. "My restaurants," he said. And he paused, choosing the next words with the deliberateness of a man who has learned that precision matters in difficult rooms. "I have a saying in my kitchens. The best things take overnight. You can't rush the process that breaks down the tough parts." I looked at him across the table. "No," I said. "You can't." Derek made a sound. Not a word, a sound. The specific sound of a man who understands belatedly and completely that the room he is sitting in was designed without him. That every element of this evening, the food, the timing, the placement of chairs, the invitation extended to a man he had met at a networking event 6 months ago and shaken hands with and categorized as unrelated to his life, had been built by his wife over 11 weeks of quiet, deliberate work while he had mistaken her silence for ignorance. He had married an architect. He had somehow never fully understood what that meant. Outside, a car passed on Cascade Road. The candles held their height in the still air. The 4th plate, which had been empty when I carried it from the kitchen, now held risotto, and the careful placement of a short rib that Raymond Cole was cutting through with the focused attention of a man who needs something to do with his hands, while the rest of his life reorganizes itself around him. I picked up my wineglass. The prisoner Cabernet that Sienna had brought. Expensive enough to impress, but not enough to be remarkable. I took a sip. It was, I noted, actually quite good. The dinner table has a particular acoustics when no one is speaking. You become aware of things that disappear under conversation. The low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the settle of the house around you. The sound of silverware touching porcelain in the careful way of people who are doing something with their hands because their hands need instruction. Raymond was eating. I was eating. Derek had pushed his short rib to the edge of his plate and was holding his wine glass without drinking from it. Sienna had her hands in her lap and was looking at the center of the table at a point between the risotto pot and the candles, the focused gaze of someone performing composure for an audience of her own internal panic. 4 people, 1 table. The architecture of a room, doing exactly what a well-designed room does, holding what is put inside it, without comment, without judgment, shaped only to contain. Raymond finished the risotto. He set his fork down at the 4 o'clock position the way someone does when they have been taught manners early and kept them late. He picked up his wine glass. I had poured him the prisoner Cabernet without asking, and he looked at it for a moment, as though reading something in the color of it. Then he looked at Sienna. "The Ponce location," he said. His voice was even, measured in the way of someone who has run kitchens and understands that a raised voice changes the temperature of a room, and a room at the wrong temperature produces nothing good. "You told me you were there on Wednesday nights, coordinating with the events team." Sienna said nothing. "I believed you," Raymond said, "because you have coordinated events at that location. Because the staff knows you. Because when I called the manager once on a Wednesday at 9 p.m. to ask about a supplier issue, he mentioned you had just left." He paused. "I didn't ask why you were still there at 9, I assumed." Another pause shorter. "I have been doing a significant amount of assuming." Derek shifted in his chair. The small sound of fabric against wood in a quiet room. Raymond did not look at him. Not yet. He was doing this in the order he had chosen, and the order he had chosen was Sienna first, which told me something about the specific texture of what he was carrying. This was not primarily about Derek, the stranger at the table, the man whose name he perhaps did not even know yet in full. This was about his wife. This was about 11 words she had said or not said on Wednesday evenings while he was at a restaurant he had built over 17 years and called by the name they had agreed on together, before she became someone who spent Wednesday evenings somewhere else. "How long?" he said. Sienna opened her mouth. "Sienna." His voice didn't rise. It went in the other direction, quieter, which was somehow more absolute. "I am going to need you to tell me the truth at this table. This woman cooked for 4 people tonight, and I believe she deserves at minimum a true answer happening in her dining room." He gestured toward me without looking at me. The gesture of a man acknowledging a debt he cannot yet calculate. Sienna looked at the table. Her voice when it came was small in a way I had not heard from her yet. The small voice beneath the polished one, the voice that surfaces when the performance has nowhere left to go. 8 months, she said. The number again. 8 months. It had weight the second time that it hadn't quite had the first. 8 months of Wednesdays. 8 months of dry cleaning picked up on different days. 8 months of a gray cashmere Henley acquiring a small pull near the left shoulder. Raymond set his wine glass down. He looked at Derek for the first time. Derek met his eyes. To his credit, and I registered this without softening toward him, credit is not absolution. Derek did not look away. He held Raymond's gaze with the particular steadiness of a man who understands he is at fault and has decided that flinching would compound it. He was a litigator. He knew when a room had already rendered its verdict and how to sit inside that verdict without making it worse. "I know who you are," Raymond said to Derek. "We met at the Trilith event in May. You represented the Hargrove group." "Yes," Derek said. "You shook my hand," Raymond said. "You told me you admired what I'd built." "A beat." "I did," Derek said. And then, after a pause that contained something that was not quite remorse, but was in the territory of it, "I meant it." Raymond looked at him for a long moment. The look of a man sorting through the precise taxonomy of what he is feeling and finding that the categories are not as clean as he would prefer. Rage was there. I could see it in the set of his jaw, the way his left hand rested flat on the table, with a stillness that was the suppression of something, rather than the absence of it. But there was also something else, the exhaustion of a man who has been suspicious for long enough that the confirmation, when it arrives, carries with it an almost physical relief. The relief of no longer having to wonder. Of the thing you knew in your body being finally officially true. He turned back to Sienna. "I want you to go home," he said. "I want you to be there when I arrive." Sienna looked up. In her eyes was the beginning of something, a protest, a negotiation, the reflex of a woman who has been managing two situations simultaneously for 8 months, and has developed the instinct to manage rather than accept. But she looked at Raymond's face, and whatever she saw there closed the reflex before it reached her mouth. She picked up her purse from beside her chair. She stood. She looked at me. The look lasted 2 seconds. In it was something I had not expected. Not defiance, not quite apology. Something more complicated than either. The look of a woman who has been caught not in the act, but in the full accumulated weight of the act, over time. In a room designed by the woman she wronged at eating food that woman cooked, and who has enough self-awareness to understand that the specific shape of this particular accountability was earned down to the last detail. "Anna," she said. I looked at her. She did not finish whatever she had intended to say. She pressed her lips together and nodded once, the nod of someone acknowledging a ledger they cannot dispute, and she walked out of the dining room. We heard the click of her heels on the white oak floors I had chosen in 2009. We heard the front door open and close. The three of us remained. Derek looked at me across the table. His face had shed the dinner party version and the lawyer version and every other version he kept in rotation, and what was underneath was something I had not seen in a long time. The unmanaged face of a man who does not know what happens next and is frightened of that specific not knowing. He had walked into this house tonight believing he was managing 2 worlds simultaneously. He now understood that one of those worlds had been managed without him for 11 weeks and had produced as its final deliverable this table, this meal, this evening. "Anna," he said. His voice was different from every version of it I had heard tonight. "Don't," I said. Not unkind, simply final. Raymond looked at Derek. "I think," he said, with the quiet authority of a man who has made decisions in difficult rooms for 20 years, that this is a conversation for another time, a different table." Derek looked at him, then at me. Then he folded his napkin neatly, the crease aligned, and set it beside his plate and stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked at me one more time with the face I had not seen in a long time, the unmanaged one, and then he walked out of the dining room and down the hall and through the front door. The sound of his car starting in the driveway, the sound of it backing out, the sound of it going. And then Raymond Cole and I were alone at the table in the house on Cascade Road, 2 people who had been sitting at the edges of the same betrayal for 8 months without knowing each other existed, with the candles burning and the short ribs in their pot and the last of the prisoner Cabernet in the bottom of the bottle. Raymond looked at the empty seats. He looked at me. "Thank you," he said. "For the text. For—" He gestured at the table, the room, the entirety of what I had built and set and cooked and timed. "For all of this." "You didn't have to come," I said. "Yes, I did," he said simply. I reached for the bottle and divided what remained between our 2 glasses with the clean equity of someone who has been making precise decisions all evening and sees no reason to stop now. We sat for a moment in the particular silence of 2 people who have just been through something together and are not yet sure what to call it, but know that it is finished, and that finished is what they needed it to be. The short ribs, Raymond said, looking at them. I've been trying to get mine to do that. He gestured at the way the meat had collapsed into the braising liquid. That texture. My chef says low and slow, but we're always fighting the dinner service timeline. You need to start the night before, I said. He nodded. The night before, he repeated. And he said it with the thoughtfulness of a man filing something away. Outside on Cascade Road, Atlanta moved through its Friday evening, the restaurants Raymond had built filling with people, the city doing what cities do when the people inside them are unaware of what has just happened in one specific dining room on one specific street. The candles had burned down an inch since dinner began. The fig tree in the backyard was dark and bare and patient in the November night. I picked up my fork. There's chocolate tart, I said. If you want to stay. Raymond Cole looked at me across the table that had never belonged to anyone. I'd like that, he said. The chocolate tart was the best I'd ever made. I do not say that with false modesty or the particular retrospective glow that memory sometimes applies to significant evenings. I say it because it is technically accurate, and because I understand why I had made it with the focus of someone for whom this specific Friday had required everything. And that kind of focus finds its way into the food, regardless of intention. The ganache had set to exactly the right density. The crust had the salt-forward shortbread quality I had been chasing for years. I had topped it simply a small amount of flaked sea salt, nothing else, because the evening had already had enough decoration. Raymond had 2 slices. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes after Derek and Sienna left. Not about them. Not primarily, not in the circular grief processing way that the evening might have collapsed into in less disciplined hands. We talked the way 2 people talk when they have just been through something together that has stripped away every social layer and left only the unvarnished version of each person sitting across from the other. We talked about his restaurants, how he had opened the first Coles on Peachtree at 27 with a loan his mother had co-signed, and a head chef he had poached from a hotel kitchen in Charlotte by offering him creative control and a percentage of the business. We talked about my work, the West Midtown project, the particular satisfaction of designing spaces that outlast the circumstances of their design. We talked about Atlanta, the city we had both chosen and built inside of, and watched change around us in the specific way that cities change when money arrives and memory has to find somewhere else to live. We did not talk about what came next. What came next was a door neither of us opened that night because neither of us had the right to open it yet. And we both understood this without saying so. There is a geometry to grief, and one of its firm rules is that you cannot stand in 2 rooms simultaneously. You have to finish being in the room you're in. At 10:47, Raymond put on his coat. I walked him to the door. On the porch, he turned and looked at the house from the outside. For a moment, the way visitors sometimes do, the instinct to see the whole of a place before leaving it. You designed this yourself, he said. Not a question. The renovation, I said. The bones were here. I just found what they wanted to be. He looked at it a moment longer. Then he looked at me. Thank you for dinner, he said. Thank you for coming, I said. He walked to his car, a dark green Range Rover. Parked at the curb, unhurried the same measured pace he had arrived with. He did not look back. I stood in the doorway until his taillights reached the end of Cascade Road and turned and were gone. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway alone. The house around me held the accumulated weight of the evening, the smell of the short ribs still warm in their pot. The candles burned to their last half-inch, the 4-place settings still on the table, with the evidence of what had happened at each one. I walked to the dining room and stood in the doorway and looked at it. The 4th plate at the head of the table. Raymond's wine glass, the last 1/4 inch of Cabernet still in it. The folded napkin where Derek had left it, the crease still aligned. I began to clear the table, not quickly with the methodical attention I bring to tasks that mark the end of something. each plate carried to the kitchen, scraped, stacked. The good flatware washed by hand and dried and put away in the drawer lined with felt. The linen napkins soaked in cold water in the sink. The candles extinguished, the remaining short ribs transferred to a storage container and refrigerated. They would be better tomorrow. All braises are the flavors consolidating overnight into something more complete than the night they were made. I washed the Dutch oven last. It took time. I did not mind. At midnight, I sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of chamomile tea and my phone. 14 messages. 3 from Derek, sent between 9 and 10:30 p.m. I did not open them. Not because I was punishing him. I was past the architecture of punishment. That particular room had already been built and occupied and vacated, but because I had nothing to add to what the evening had already said, with more precision and economy than anything I could compose at midnight. One message from Marcus. Heard the door close twice. Everything okay? Marcus lived 4 blocks away and had apparently positioned himself there for the evening without telling me, which was exactly the kind of thing Marcus Webb would do. And which made me put the phone down and look at the ceiling for a moment with something that was not quite a smile, but was in its neighborhood. I texted him back. Everything is exactly what it needed to be. Thank you. 3 dots appeared. Then tart, any good? I looked at the remaining third of the chocolate tart on its stand on the counter. Best I've made, I wrote. Save me a slice. I put the phone down. I finished my tea. The dominoes fell the way dominoes fall, not all at once. Not in one dramatic cascade, but in the specific sequence that the arrangement has always required, each one waiting only for the one before it to complete its fall. I did not push them. I had set them in order weeks ago and stepped back. And this evening had done the rest. Saturday morning, Derek's mother called me. I did not answer. She left a voicemail that was 7 minutes long and covered in order confusion, concerned the defense of her son, that mothers perform regardless of evidence. And then at the 5-minute and 40-second mark, a silence that meant she had heard enough of the story to stop defending and start grieving. I did not call her back that day. I would eventually. Miriam Cole was not a woman who deserved to be left in silence, and whatever her son had done was not something she had chosen. Sunday morning, Derek texted to ask if he could come get some things. I said yes. He came at 2 p.m. when I was not there. I had gone to a gallery opening in Ponce City Market that I had planned to attend weeks earlier. And I went because the work was worth seeing, and because my life was not a waiting room. He took 3 bags of clothes, his record collection, the leather sectional from the basement. He left the Dutch oven. He left the Savannah porcelain. He left everything in the kitchen, which told me he understood in the practical way that ending things requires you to understand which things had never really been his. Monday, I was in the office by 8. Priya said I looked rested. I told her the weekend had been clarifying. She accepted this, and we moved on to the West Midtown drawings, and I worked until 6:30 and drove home and cooked a simple dinner just for myself, pasta with olive oil and garlic, and a handful of herbs from the pot on the windowsill, and ate at the kitchen counter because the dining room table was still set for 4. And I had not decided yet what to do with that. The professional fallout arrived, as I had known it would, through the specific channels of a community small enough to function like a neighborhood. By Wednesday, the story had moved. Not through social media. Neither Raymond nor I had posted anything. And Derek and Sienna had the particular silence of people who understand they are not in a position to control the narrative. It moved the way Atlanta stories move through the networks of people who work alongside each other and eat in each other's restaurants and attend each other's gallery openings, and sit on the same non-profit boards, and have been having versions of the same conversation about who is trustworthy and who is not for the entirety of their professional lives. By Thursday evening, I knew that Derek had lost the Hargrove account. The Hargrove Group's senior partner was a man named William O'Say, who had attended Morehouse with Raymond Cole, and had been at Cole's on Peachtree for dinner every month for 11 years. He had not posted about it. He had not made a statement. He had simply called Derek's firm Thursday morning and asked that the account be transferred to a different attorney. The reason he gave was a conflict of interest, which was technically true in ways William O'Say did not specify and did not need to. The Hargrove account was the largest in Derek's current portfolio. I learned this from Marcus, who had learned it from someone at the firm, who had told someone else who had told someone who had once worked in my office before moving to a competing practice, which is the precise route by which information travels in a community where everyone has worked alongside everyone else at some point in the past 15 years. I was in a site meeting when Marcus texted me the news. I read it during a break, standing in the unfinished shell of the West Midtown 7th floor, the floor I had solved the structural problem on the night I first understood what was happening in my marriage. The construction crew was on lunch. I was alone on the floor with the exposed bones of the building around me and the Atlanta skyline through the open window frames and the information sitting in my phone. I put the phone in my pocket. I looked at the 7th floor and at the problem I had solved, and at the way the light was coming through the open frames at the angle that would become in 18 months when the glass was in the thing that made this floor the best one in the building. I thought about something Raymond had said at the table about his kitchen saying, "The best things take overnight. You can't rush the process that breaks down the tough parts." I thought about 8 hours of short ribs. I thought about a fig tree planted in the ground and left alone for 3 years before it produced anything at all. I thought about 11 weeks of watching and knowing and saying nothing and building quietly in the space between what was and what needed to be. The construction crew came back from lunch. I put on my hard hat. I went back to work. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Not the dramatic kind of arrival, not a process server at the office door, not a confrontation in the driveway. Derek had them delivered through his firm's courier service to the house on Cascade Road, a small mercy that I recognized as the last one he had available to offer. I was home when they came. I signed for the envelope, set it on the kitchen counter next to my coffee, finished my coffee, then opened it. 12 years of a shared life. 9 married, 3, before that reduced to the procedural language of dissolution. Assets, the house, the accounts we had kept separately because I had always believed that financial independence inside a marriage was not a lack of trust, but a form of respect. Derek had never argued with this arrangement. In the end, it simplified things considerably. I read every page. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Delaney, who had offices in Buckhead and who I had used for contract work for years, and who, when I explained the situation in the flat, precise language I had developed for explaining it to people who needed the facts rather than the texture, said only, "Send it over. I'll have comments by Thursday." Patricia Delaney had comments by Wednesday afternoon. I was not angry at the papers. I had been expecting them, had known they were coming the way, a structural element is going to fail when you have watched the stress accumulate in the wrong places for long enough. The anger, the actual grief-adjacent anger that arrives before the grief itself, had come and gone in private, in the weeks before the Friday dinner, in the specific hours between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the house was quiet enough that I could not avoid it. By the time the papers arrived, it had already done its work and left the way weather leaves present total and then gone. The landscape afterward both diminished and clarified. What I felt reading the papers was something closer to administrative. The clean procedural feeling of ending something that had already ended and simply needed the correct documentation. Atlanta, meanwhile, continued to be Atlanta. The thing about a community that functions like a neighborhood is that it has a memory. Not the internet kind, not the permanent searchable record that lives outside of time and context, but the living kind. The kind that exists in the minds of people who were at the same events and ate at the same tables, and remember specifically who was standing next to whom and what they said, and whether it turned out to be true. This kind of memory is slower than the internet and more durable. It does not trend. It simply remains. Derek's name moved through this memory in the weeks after the Friday dinner the way a ship moves through water, leaving a wake that was visible long after the ship itself had passed. People who had referred clients to him quietly stopped. A seat on the board of a midtown nonprofit he had held for 4 years became available when his term somewhat coincidentally was not renewed. Calvin, his tennis friend, the one with the eggs Benedict and the fixed backhand, called me 3 weeks after the dinner to apologize for something he said he should have told me sooner, which was that he had known something was wrong for longer than he had said anything, and that he was sorry. I told him I appreciated the call. I meant it. There are gradations of culpability in these situations, and Calvin's grade was the one assigned to people who looked away rather than people who participated. And looking away while not blameless is its own category. Sienna's business felt the effects with different physics. Gather and Grace had built its reputation on the Atlanta professional circuit, the same circuit where Raymond Cole was known, and where word moved through lunch and dinner and the specific social infrastructure of people who choose vendors the way they choose everything else in their lives, on the basis of trust and on the recommendation of people whose judgment they have already verified. 2 corporate clients who had used Gather and Grace for annual events quietly did not renew their contracts for the following year. A third requested a referral to another firm, citing scheduling conflicts that no one examined too closely. Sienna did not close the business, but it contracted, the particular contraction of something that has lost the specific air that kept it inflated. I know this because Atlanta told me. Not directly, no one sat across from me and delivered a report. But when you are embedded in a community long enough, it tells you things without meaning to, through the aggregate of small moments. The conversation at a client dinner that paused in a specific way when Sienna's name came up, the mention from a colleague that a venue Sienna's firm had regularly used was booked solid for the next quarter, the information that arrived sideways. And without announcement, the way most true things do, I did not track it. I did not seek it out. I simply moved through my life, and my life moved through the community, and the community had a memory, and the memory was doing what memories do. Raymond filed for divorce 11 days after the dinner. I know this because he texted me. A brief message, the kind he had established as his register in the handful of texts we had exchanged since that Friday economical direct, containing exactly what was necessary and nothing performative. Filed this morning. Thought you should know. I wrote back. Thank you for telling me. Are you okay? 3 minutes? Getting there. You getting there, I wrote. We did not communicate beyond that for several weeks. This was correct. There is a geometry to grief, and it has firm rules, and one of the firmest is that you cannot stand in 2 rooms simultaneously, and both Raymond and I were still in the rooms we needed to finish being in. I had said this to myself the night of the dinner, and I said it again now, and I believed it the second time, with the additional authority of having watched it be true. My work in those weeks was the best I had done in years. I do not think this was coincidence. There is something that happens when you stop spending energy on the maintenance of a situation that cannot be maintained. The energy does not disappear, it redirects. The West Midtown project moved faster than the timeline had projected. A new commission came in a private residence in Ansley Park, a complete renovation. The clients, a couple who had bought a 1920s Craftsman and wanted to restore the original architecture while opening the interior to light, in ways the original structure had not allowed. I went to the first site visit on a Thursday morning in December and stood in the living room of the Craftsman and looked at the bones of it, the original crown molding, still intact under decades of renovation decisions that had not understood what they were covering. And I felt the specific clarity that comes at the beginning of a project when the potential is still total and the constraints have not yet arrived. I thought, I know what this wants to be. This is the feeling that has never failed me, not in architecture, not in the larger structures of my life. The knowledge of what something wants to be beneath what it currently is, if you are willing to do the patient work of uncovering it. The Ansley Park clients were a couple in their early 50s, James and Cecile Worthington, both physicians. A warmth between them that was the particular warmth of people who have been through difficult things together and emerged with their fundamental regard for each other intact. At the end of the first site visit, Cecile asked me how I found the work, not the technical work, the emotional work of it, the inhabiting of other people's spaces in order to imagine them differently. I told her I found it grounding. She asked what I meant, and I thought about it genuinely. I told her the work asks you to see what is actually there before you imagine what could be. Most mistakes in architecture and most mistakes in general come from skipping the first step, from imagining before you have fully seen. She looked at her husband. Something passed between them. She said, "I think we found the right person." The divorce was finalized in the early spring. Patricia Delaney called me on a Tuesday morning with the clean, flat language of a woman who gives people information without editorializing, which is one of the things I had always valued most about her. "It's done," she said. "Thank you, Patricia," I said. "You'll receive the documentation this week." "I know." A pause. Patricia Delaney did not typically pause. "You handled this with a lot of dignity," she said. "I've seen people handle it the other way. It tends to be more expensive in every sense." I thought about 4 place settings, a 4th plate carried from a kitchen, a doorbell at 7:45. "I'm an architect," I said. "I believe in getting the structure right before anything else." She made the small sound that serves as laughter when someone is still technically at work. "I'll send the documentation this week," she said. And we said goodbye, and I put the phone down on my desk in the study with the built-in bookshelves floor to ceiling on 3 walls, the study that had always been entirely mine, and I sat for a moment with the fact of it. Done. The words sat quietly in the room. Outside through the study window, the backyard was beginning its April return. The garden beds along the south fence putting up the first green of things, coming back the soil dark, and willing the cut-back stalks of last year giving way to new growth in the patient, incremental way of things that have always known they would return. The fig tree was the furthest along, already leafing, already reaching toward whatever light it could find, the way it had been doing every April for the past 11 years without requiring anything from anyone, except the time to do it. I watched it for a while. Then I turned back to my desk and the Ansley Park drawings, and the quiet, long work of building something that would outlast the circumstances of its making. The first Friday dinner I cooked for myself was in late April, not the first meal I'd been cooking for myself since the November evening. Derek had taken his bags and his records and his leather sectional and redistributed himself into the smaller life that fitted what he had done. But the first intentional Friday dinner, the one where I set the table properly, used the good porcelain, lit the candles, and sat down alone with the specific ceremony I had maintained for 9 years of marriage and had not yet permitted myself since. I made the braised chicken with olives and preserved lemon, the one from the cookbook with the broken spine. The one I had told Derek I invented in the first year of our marriage because it had felt more romantic at the time, and because I had stood at the stove for an hour and believed that counted for something. I made it exactly as written, following the recipe for the first time in years, instead of from memory, because I wanted to return to the source of it, to the actual thing rather than my accumulated version of it. It took 90 minutes. I ate it at the dining room table. 1 place setting centered at the side where I had always sat. The good porcelain, a single candle, a glass of white wine I had opened specifically for the occasion, a Côte du Rhône Blanc I had been saving for no reason except that I had always been a person who saved things for the right moment and had finally stopped requiring the moment to involve someone else. The chicken was excellent. Afterward, I sat for a while in the quiet of the dining room. The table was large for 1 person, and I was aware of its dimensions in the particular way you become aware of the size of rooms when you stop filling them with other people's presence. But it was not an unhappy awareness. It was the awareness of space, of the room being exactly itself without performance or accommodation. I thought about what the table had held. 9 years of Friday dinners, arguments that started here and ended elsewhere, reconciliations that ended here. The 47 guests I could name if I tried, could place in specific seats, could remember what they had eaten and what they had said that was worth remembering. And one November dinner that had ended with 4 chairs pulled back from their places and 2 people remaining and a chocolate tart that was the best I had ever made. All of it had happened at this table. The table was still here. I was still here. In the weeks that followed, I finished the West Midtown project. The handover meeting was on a Wednesday morning in early May. And I walked through the completed building with the clients and the contractor, and Priya and I felt the specific satisfaction of a finished space. The drawings made permanent, the elevations become rooms. The 7th floor caught the light through its south-facing windows at 10 in the morning, the way I had designed it to catch the light. And I stood there for a moment, alone, after the clients had moved on to the next floor, and I let it be exactly what it was. The Ansley Park renovation began in June. The original crown molding once uncovered was finer than I had imagined from beneath the layers that had covered it. It always is. The things that have been covered longest tend to be the most worth finding. Raymond Cole called me in early May, not a text, a call, which meant he had decided the conversation he wanted to have required the register of an actual voice. I was in the kitchen when my phone rang, and I saw his name, and I stood still for a moment before I answered, not from uncertainty, but from the recognition of a moment that has its own particular weight and should be entered without hurrying. "Anna," he said. "Raymond," I said. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the fig tree." I paused. I mentioned the fig tree. "You mentioned you planted one. That you'd planted it because you liked the idea of something that required patience." A pause. "I've been thinking about that phrase since November. It's been keeping company with me." I looked through the kitchen window at the fig tree. May in Atlanta had done its work. The tree was fully leafed. Now the branches dense and reaching the small, early figs already forming at the nodes, green and hard, and months away from being ready. "It takes 3 years to produce the first time," I said. "The first 2 years you tend it and nothing comes and you tend it anyway. And the third year it produces, and then every year after." A pause. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not," he paused. "Not soon. I'm aware of the geometry of this. I'm not suggesting soon." I looked at the fig tree. "I know a place," he said. "The private dining room at the downtown club. I've been saving it for the right occasion. I've been waiting a long time for an occasion that felt worth it." "Raymond," I said. "I know," he said. "Not yet." "Not yet," I agreed. We talked for 40 minutes about other things. His restaurants, the new menu he was developing for the Ponce location. A supplier relationship he had been rebuilding from scratch since the beginning of the year, the particular satisfaction of returning to the fundamentals of something after a period of distraction. We talked about the Ansley Park house. What I had found beneath the surface is the way renovation work sometimes reveals that the best thing was always there and simply needed someone patient enough to uncover it. We talked about Atlanta in May, the specific quality of the light. At this time of year, the city becoming itself again after the gray months. Before he hung up, he said, "The chocolate tart. I've been trying to replicate it. The ganache. The ganache. Mine breaks. My pastry chef says I'm impatient with the temperature." "You have to let the cream cool before you add the chocolate," I said. "Most people rush that step. The cream needs to come down to the right temperature or the ganache separates. You can't speed it up. You just have to wait." A pause. "You just have to wait," he repeated. Yes, I'll try that, he said. Thank you, Anna. Good night, Raymond. I put the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood for a moment in the kitchen with the evening light coming through the window above the sink, the light that fell across the counter and the fig tree and the garden beds. And everything I had planted and tended and waited on in this backyard for 11 years. The figs on the tree were still green, still months away, still doing the patient invisible work of becoming what they had always been going to be. I turned back to the kitchen. I had bread proving on the counter a sourdough I had started 3 days ago, the long cold ferment that develops the complexity you cannot achieve any other way. I checked it, pressed it gently with 2 fingers, the way you do when you need to know if the time has come. The dough held the impression for a moment, and then slowly with the particular elasticity of something ready released. It was ready. I shaped it. I scored the top with the lame in the pattern I'd been using for years, a simple cross, nothing decorative, just the necessary cuts that allow the bread to open in the oven rather than tear. I put it into bake. While it baked, I sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of tea and my sketchbook, not work drawings, the personal sketchbook I'd kept since architecture school, the one full of spaces I was designing for no client, for no commission, simply for the pleasure of imagining what a room could hold. I had neglected it during the years of the marriage and returned to it since November, with an attention that felt like recovering something I had been carrying at a distance for too long. I drew the Ansley Park living room, the crown molding restored. The south wall open to light the proportions the original architect had intended, now finally visible. Then I drew something else. A room I'd not drawn before, larger than anything in the Cascade Roadhouse. High ceilings, east-facing windows for morning light, a table at the center long enough for 8, but designed to be comfortable for 2. A kitchen that opened to it without a wall between them, the way kitchens and dining rooms should open to each other in a house designed for a life that is lived in both at once. I did not know whose house this was. I drew it anyway. The bread came out of the oven at 9:15. I let it rest on the rack for 40 minutes, the full time, not rushing it, because rushing bread that needs to rest is how you lose everything the process has built. When I finally cut it, the interior was exactly what it should be, open and complex and fragrant with a particular depth that only comes from time. I cut a slice and ate it, standing at the counter with butter and salt and the specific satisfaction of something made well and tasted at exactly the right moment. Outside, the Atlanta night was warm and still, and the fig tree was dark against the sky. I had planted it at 32 because I liked the idea of something that required patience. I had tended it through years when it produced nothing. I had watched it grow tall and wide and full, and waited season after season for the evidence of a process that had been happening invisibly the entire time. The figs would be ready in August. They always were. I am not a woman who believes that pain is instructive by nature. Pain is pain. It does not owe you wisdom. But if you are the kind of person who watches carefully and waits and does not flinch from what you see, sometimes the watching itself becomes a kind of knowing, and the knowing eventually becomes a kind of freedom. What I learned in that season was not about betrayal. Betrayal taught me nothing I had not suspected about the fragility of people and the distance between who we perform ourselves to be and who we are at 11:47 at night when we believe no one is watching. What I learned was about architecture, about the difference between a structure that looks sound and a structure that is sound, about the necessity of seeing clearly before you build, about the patient discipline of a foundation laid in the right material at the right depth. I learned that silence is not passivity. The most powerful rooms I've ever designed have been the quietest ones, spaces that do not announce themselves, but hold completely everything brought inside them. Silence in the right hands is not absence, but it is a room being built while no one else can see the work. I learned that the best things take overnight. that what breaks down under low and patient heat is exactly what needed breaking, that you cannot rush the process that transforms the tough parts into something worth eating. And I learned, am still learning, that planting something is an act of faith in a future self. The woman who plants a fig tree is not the same woman who tastes the first fig. But she is the reason that woman exists. Tend the things that take time. Wait without apology. The fruit comes when it comes. I still cook on Friday evenings. I still use the good porcelain. I still light the candles. The table is set for one for now, and I am not in a hurry. I know what this wants to be.